On June 2, 2012, DGP, the Center for Design and Geopolitics, held its second annual conference. Entitled Designing Geopolitics 2, it was held in the Black Box Theater of Cal IT 2, the California Institute for Telecommunications and Information Technology in La Jolla, on the campus of the University of California at San Diego. So this is our final presentation. When I was putting together the invite list for the conference, there was a few names that I put together, and Alisa Andrasek was right at the top of people that I wanted to bring out to Cal IT2 because her work, her work, but I think really speak to a lot of the issues that we like to work on here, and I think provide a really a fascinating model for how it is that this can be have an impact on the literal form of the world in which we inhabit. I was putting together notes for this introduction. I came across a photo here, which I have up here, my one photo that I wanted to show today, which is a picture of Gilles Deleuze sitting on the beach in Big Sur, California, near Santa Cruz in the mid-1970s, as French philosophers, died in 1995. Deleuze sits there examining its sands, its breathless striations, the silica terrain. Placing the image, I can't help but think, though, about the next moment, this is 1972, I think, next moment about the nearby purposes to which silicon was just being put, namely as the physical medium of synthetic computational intelligence just up the freeway in the areas near Palo Alto, already having been renamed in honor of the substance. And for me, these two images, in a way, cross each other. Deleuze contemplating the plane of immanence, working through in some way in the sands of California the ideas that would become 1,000 Plateaus, and doing so in the regional shadow of Intel's miniaturized mechanical approximation of the Turing machine. Both are concerned with a conception of the direct material world as a contingent plastic recombinant landscape, one produced in the calculation of sets of differences and from a particular phase space of potential virtual possibilities. At the end of the day, Deleuze's philosophy is probably more about chemistry than computation, continuities than digitalizations, but its imagery of worlds operating from the multiplication of immanent processes and genetic diagrams upon oscillations of the physical and the virtual is deeply familiar to the material culture of informational realism. Friedrich Kittler said that, quote, silicon is nature. Silicon is nature calculating itself. If you leave out the part of engineers who write little structures on silicon, you see one part of matter calculating the rest of matter. Deleuze locates the plane of what he calls the plane of immanence in the ceaseless, precise economies of becoming and solidity. It is a matrix through which possible worldly formations, the virtual, both contain and are contained by the physical properties and capacities of substances and their assemblages, the physical. Alan Turing's theoretical machines of universal computability reside in the same matrix, describing a binary mathematical ubiquity touching all possible combinations of things, for which information is fundamental of matter, and computation and physics blend into a shared algorithmic program. A formalist reduction of substance and systems to their intrinsic algorithmicity is what Stefan Wolfram calls computational equivalence. And in a breathtaking feat of heroic essentialism, quantum computationalist Seth Lloyd hypothesizes the total information space of the universe, that is, the universe itself, as having exhausted to date, quote, no more than a 10 to the 120th operations on 10 to the 90th bits. Now, for our purposes, of course, we invoke and contemplate this deep computationality with due hesitation, if only as a seductive model without making any claims for it, really. But what is that model across its two poles, a Deleuzian Turing, a Turingian Deleuze? The planes of computational immanence assemble into the ecological machines, bio, chemo, physical logos, through which all life informs all Earth, both terrestrial and extraterrestrial, is nested within itself. So who do we turn to for what this looks like? My favorite architect, Alisa Andrasek, is a good one to visualize the implications of these and to show us how they build cities. Alisa Andrasek is an experimental practitioner, a research-based educator of architecture and computational processes and design. In 2001, she founded BioThing, a cross-disciplinary laboratory that focuses on the generative potential of computational systems for design. In 2005, she initiated Continuum, an interdisciplinary research collective focusing on advanced computational geometry and software development. She graduated from the University of Zagreb and holds a master's in advanced architectural design from Columbia. She teaches architectural studios and theory seminars at the AA in London, Columbia, but now, as we know, based at the Bartlett, University of London. Andrasek was a co-winner of the Metropolis First Next Generation Design Competition. Her works are in the permanent collection at the Centre Pompidou in Paris, the FRAC in Orléans, and so forth. She curated the East Coast design section for the Emergent Talent, Emergent Technologies exhibition of the Beijing Biennial. But the work and Alisa will speak for themselves. So it's my pleasure to conclude the panels today with Alisa Andrasek. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, for a beautiful introduction, and especially, can you see me? I'm here. Especially thank you, everyone. Okay. One last thing. I think everything that could have happened, so technology-wise. Can you guys plug me? Oh, good, good. Okay. So thank you everyone for the patience, and I guess part of the topic today is also definitely, I do have a power now. You do have power. Complexity and crisis situations. So we had just a plethora, a myriad of crises right now, and I always tell my students that constraints are good and that actually we should embrace them and work with them. So now I'm put to the test, so here we go. So today I would just like to quickly, I'm actually my presentation, my talk presentation is on this giant screen, so I hope you can see some of these reference images. So I would just like to recall this fact that even the kind of digital computer is coming from a kind of material background or analog background. And one of the core ideas about my work is this idea of convergence of matter and information, which is happening on a kind of larger scale, but also we are engaging with it in a kind of particular way. And obviously, Jacquard loom weaving machine also started weaving this kind of patterns, algebraic patterns, through this kind of wooden punch cards. So these kind of abstract patterns were guiding this material process of weaving the fabric. And another topic in the work is the idea of increased resolution. Today we spoke a lot about large data and kind of increased kind of resolution of material world that is now accessible through the resources of computation. So here you can see two images of the brain. One is the kind of traditional diagram of the brain, which shows this sort of, I'm very nervous because we have a brain scientist in the audience, but basically the kind of brain diagram that I sometimes liken to a bubble diagram in architecture that has a kind of distinct bubbles. So if you have something like, let's say, a house and it has a programmatic division, you have a living room, you have a, I don't know, bathroom or kitchen. So there are these kind of distinct zones, but one of the contemporary images of the brain, and also yesterday we've seen some dazzling images of the brain in in Brain Observatory here, but the image that you can see on the screen is Brainbow, developed by scientists at Harvard, and the idea of, in this case, the neurons of the brain of the mouse are scanned, but at the same time algorithm is tracking certain chemicals, and suddenly through this large data and through this kind of another type of lens, we are seeing and learning about many facets of the brain. So this is just to introduce this idea of increased resolution via resources of computation and information. So when I started my practice biothing in 2001, I somehow decided to put our focus at the time into mathematics and computation in order to try to develop that sort of connective hinge between different systems and how they can start talking to each other. I call this kind of library of seeds at the core of biothing Genver, as this kind of malleable evolving library that through the exposure to the design process actually learns and mutates, because we are not computer scientists, we are not mathematicians, but as architects, designers, we do work with these computational algorithms, and through design actually these things are also evolving. This idea of high resolution fabric of architecture, over time we were looking for mathematical strategies to actually allow for or access a higher level of complexity and resilience. And one of the most successful methods was basically distribution of information. So structure of discrete, distributed, reusable, redundant units of logic allows for reaching into deeper layers of polymorphic code. So for instance, one switch that happened in our work was from procedural functions in mathematics to the object-oriented one, when the logics are distributed into smaller objects that are possible to recombine. So what this also allowed, and I will be talking quite a bit about that now, is the idea of heterogeneity, which was also mentioned earlier. And instead of having this kind of blanketed function or a logic, something like a sine wave function, for instance, that we used a lot in our earlier work, you actually have this kind of much more local neighborhood-based computing, not unlike most of computing found in biology or processing of information, I should say, where there is a certain local adaptation that allows for polymorphism. So these are just some images on the screen in the front from a project that we did with and the video that was running at the beginning, that we did in collaboration with Ross Lovegrove, this product designer, where we created a light ecology for this glass pavilion. And there was this kind of through-the-looking glass idea of being almost in a kind of underwater world. And agents were, in this case, only adapting to the boundaries and the kind of textures of the glass. One very important thing, and I guess we just experienced it also with a series of unpredictable technical difficulties, is this idea of a contingency. French philosopher Quentin Melessou writes about contingency quite a bit, and this idea, how do we engage with complexity, or to be more precise, this idea of contingency, and how we develop this resilience. And this is what I was trying to outline a little bit through this idea of using certain kind of information structures or mathematics that allow for this redundancy and resilience that can actually absorb such territories that are very unstable. And also, I would like to bring the idea of agency that is today also there were some discussions that extends beyond just a human kind of anthropocentric model that in architecture especially was the case so far. And this idea of contingency, and I like to look sometimes into the work of contemporary mathematicians. One of them is Fernando Zalamea's work, and he actually works a lot on this kind of sociopolitics in Latin America. And I'm coming from Balkans, for instance, another very unstable territory, from Croatia, as you know, and then we have Middle East, and there are some of these I guess at the moment everything is unstable, but he's looking into this kind of complex trans-ecologies that one finds in sociopolitics of, for instance, South America, and looking into certain logics that can actually, or mathematics, that can actually allow for this kind of synthesis or open and complex synthesis. So he's also an expert on Charles Peirce's work. You know Peirce from probably as a reference to pragmatism, but Peirce was also, I mean, he was a polymath. He engaged with lots of different work, and one of the theories that he developed was the theory of triadic logic. And I was in a conversation with Reza Negarestani, this fascinating Iranian philosopher and writer who wrote Cyclonopedia. I hope some of you read this book. It's quite mind-bending and mind-blowing. But we spoke about this kind of idea of triadic logic as something that has beyond this kind of binary logic that is a base for most of the computational processes that we still use, kind of true-false Boolean logic. There is a third ambiguous element, the one that introduces noise and uncertainty, and one could recall in this context Shannon's information theory on noise, and also the second law of thermodynamics. So this kind of openness in this ambiguous element is very important in the structure of the computational things that we are working on. And so these three sons, I forgot to also mention, obviously, Serres parasite, Michel Serres parasite, as a third unwelcome guest or noise that creates the exchange between the logical and the material, which kind of hits the core of what our work is about. And it also allows for this kind of heterogeneity, ruptures, cuts in the fabric of, in our case, architecture. So on the screen, if you just look at the example, this is actually a student work that was developed further for, and it's now part of a permanent collection of Centre Pompidou, is the work with voxel space and agents, multi-agent systems, where each agent, I mean, they are kind of programmed locally, and they have certain local relationships to each other. But when you start sampling data, and on this green field that you can see on the screen, if you just zoom into, I cannot point it now, but if you just zoom into one little corner and sample maybe just 10% of the field that you are seeing on the screen, you get this much data out of it. So it's not just XYZ position anymore or some sort of geometry, but it's actually all the data about the behavior of the agent and their relationships to each other, and at the same time stochastics, certain local stochastics that are embedded into it, and possibility to feed external information. So then you can start going into these pre-geometry states, what I call, because in architecture, architects like to work with geometry, but if you go into this kind of pre-geometry states of more like a soup of data, or this kind of primordial soup of data, then you can start instantiating, for instance, in this simple example, also different types of geometries or different types of behaviors in different areas of the field, and that allows you to develop some sort of rudimentary heterogeneity. And again, this idea of adaptation and open synthesis is something that I would like to show now on some of the examples of our studies and research, because I think it's very important for the kind of access to how do we even engage with a kind of idea of synthetic ecologies or complex ecologies that architects, in my mind, failed radically with the ideas of green architecture and isolated, optimized systems. And often I look into some I mean, some structures or aggregations that exist that are not actually done by designers, but that actually emerge under pressure. And in traditional architecture, we have plenty of examples. You can see on the screen, for instance, Greek villages that computing, again, neighborhood conditions with structure. They were developed on the hills under pressure of pirate invasions. So they had to kind of build in a very compressed way with a very kind of steep topography. Some other examples from Croatia, for instance, but you can find it all over the world, similar kind of terracing for development of vineyards and other cultures, lavender fields, but again, adaptation to the topography of the site or the hill. Or this kind of, in the lower left corner, you can see a canyon of this street. It's a Mediterranean street, Dalmatian street, that has this kind of, that is very narrow and tall, and the whole fabric, urban fabric, is meandering, so it's increasing the kind of flow of air. So there are some of these models that are developed, that emerge under the pressure of certain local physics and local kind of social dynamics and economy that actually under pressure develop this kind of formations. So this idea of working with the local physics and amplifying them or including them into the formation of architecture, I think the video might be a little bit choppy, but what you are seeing on the screen is student study on studying of topography in Istria in Croatia, where they were looking into steepness of the hills and trying to, and some other local physics, like for instance exposure to the sun and views and similar, for development of this housing urban intervention. So basically agents would then at a very precise rate detect read certain local physics, and through their kind of local interactions nest into the landscape. And then there was a design intent involved in the next step, where they would develop this fabric of housing. And I will elaborate on this particular case a bit later. The other quick example, just to reference the idea, another student project from DRL, from AA in London, where we looked into hydrology of the rivers. So because as you know, even if you put something very small in the riverbed, the sedimentation is quite intense. It will immediately start working. So at this point, we are reaching the kind of stage where we can actually incorporate this kind of data of sedimentation in order to use it actually as a building material. So it's not just intervention where we go into the river and just plump some giant structure there, but we can now actually start reading data from the dynamics of the river and start developing certain much more sensitive structures. In this case, students proposed almost needle-like structures at a very high population of structural elements, but they were very fine. So they worked kind of symbiotically with the local physics and also local biology, because they were looking into growing oyster farms and local fish species. So everything was kind of simulated, using simulation to test certain insertion of structures, very sensitive structures, into this ecology. So in the end, you get this kind of idea of synthetic ecology. And another quick example of our project looking into coastline of again in Croatia, for a very large development of a new city, in fact, and developer wanted to develop many marinas. So we looked into, as maybe you're familiar, when Mandelbrot was developing mathematics of fractals, he was trying to somehow describe this property of roughness that we find in nature. Certain coastlines are more wrinkled than the others, or many systems in nature have this kind of property of roughness. That is not something that you can describe with the mathematics of Euclidean XYZ description. So we looked into this kind of fractal logic and analyzed the behavior of the coastline, and then analyzed the data of development of marinas and tried to marry these two systems, but in a more kind of organic way. It was a larger study for a kind of urban sort of master plan, of a pre-urban kind of ingredients of the master plan, where we were analyzing the topography for the development of, again, housing sequences, analyzing the whole landscape for development of the circuitry of roads. So this idea of adaptation that I introduced earlier could be now used for many different problems like this. In this case, it was in a natural landscape, trying to really, if we do have to build in this sequence of incredible kind of natural environment, how do we try to adapt or incorporate local physics into the fabric of the proposal, rather than just putting something from the top. And mentioning fractals again, as I was saying at the beginning, sometimes this kind of algorithmic entities, they migrate to different design problems. So although we were using fractals to analyze the behavior of the coastline for this case, we also used the same code to develop a custom written software for design of a jewelry, for instance. And in this case, 3D printed jewelry. So in this case, the problem was, how do you adapt this kind of fabric of, let's say, a necklace to your body? So if again, fractal has this possibility to go finer or rougher, so you need a finer fabric that actually presses against your skin, maybe in this position of the neck, while when it gets to some other parts of the body, it can grow. So this is a very kind of simple, again, example of adaptation. And if we could bring some magnets on the screen now. I was obsessed with electromagnetic fields for a couple of years because of their ability to be so adaptive, again, because if you introduce a new magnet into the field, it will immediately retexture the whole field. So we did quite a few projects with magnets, and I won't go through all of them. I will just go through one of them, which was this competition in Taiwan, in Kaohsiung in Taiwan, which is Taiwan is a tropical climate. So what is interesting, one of the interesting aspects of the culture is that these night markets are they're very alive because of the weather. I mean, weather is a big part of it, because everyone, the public space is activated during the night when it's cooler. So you have these amazing lightscapes of night markets. At the same time, our program required us to develop pop music center, massive, on a 1 kilometer long site with 9 theaters, of which one was for 5,000 people, which is in the scale of biggest theaters in the world. And it was a massive program. And again, I thought about this kind of local culture of night markets that has this kind of lightscapes and lightscapes of a very kind of vibrant and colors of Taiwanese pop music. And at the same time, the site was contaminated because it was on a post-industrial kind of location. And you can see it on the screen. It's 1 by 1 kilometer almost. And this is a bay where the river, it's called Love River, enters the sea. And basically, we wanted to also remediate the site. So we proposed this park that would actually have cultures of algae planted under the whole site. So we kind of planted the algae factory below and within the site, because algae the idea was also that they're in the surfaces of the park, and even in the surfaces, I'll show that in a second, in the surfaces of the structure and the roofs. And the reason why we use magnets or magnetic envelopes for this project is because we had 9 theaters, and theaters have this kind of envelopes that the nature of the space is large kind of spatial enclosures. And what was possible to program, and we always make this kind of custom written software for the design projects, it was possible to program different sizes and different intensities. So the whole fabric was able to stitch itself into a coherent into a coherent site. So we didn't have to collage different stuff into it, but we were able to weave all these different programs together. Also 3 museums, tons of shopping, and I mean, it was a massive program. And at the same time, because this was a large scale, we needed something with a kind of larger intricacy algorithm that would break this kind of homogeneity almost of these big envelopes. So we introduced another algorithm, which was Brownian motion based on agents. Brownian motion, some of you probably are familiar, but it's like if you let a drunk person walks through Venice and just gets and meanders around and gets lost, and that is the behavior that this algorithm has basically. So as a result, it develops this intricate circuitry, and we wanted to replicate this kind of urban fabric of little streets. I was showing Dalmatian Street as a canyon before, in order to somehow develop a flow of air through this fabric. So when people are actually in exterior space during the day, that we increase the airflow within this fabric. So again, when we use algorithms, there is always this kind of idea of how we sort of activate it for different design intent. And this is one of the renderings of the proposal, where the red stuff, I'm hoping you can see it, but this is the algae factory penetrating the whole project. Marrying, there was this kind of idea of hybridizing the genes of, again, local culture of night markets, these algae that basically the scientists actually here in California are looking into this kind of LED lights that are sponsoring growth of algae. So our algae factory basically would be also a field of lights that are programmed to work with algae growth, but as well with this kind of pop culture, and especially because the site lives during the night, it starts to glow. Another quick example similar to that is in Croatia, in Dubrovnik, a project that we developed for a big urban plaza, because Dubrovnik is unfortunately becoming this big tourist destination where tourists completely swamp the whole city fabric. And I remember as a child going there and having these amazing summer festivals, and there were these pockets of urban squares and white stone and really beautiful environment. But now it's just covered and swamped with tourists. So there was this proposal to extend that kind of gene of city public squares and amplify it. So we developed something like a double plaza and used, because of these technical difficulties, I erased some of the videos. But anyways, we used the algorithm of cellular automata class 4, which can actually, it has this kind of schizophrenic behavior that it can hybridize 2 or 3 different behaviors at the same time. So it's kind of hard to explain a little bit without image, but within this cellular automata, some layers of algorithms were programming different systems. So one layer was distributing this kind of planting of lavender fields, which is something that you find in the area a lot on the islands. Some were planting the misters, because this white stone, it gets really hot during the summer. Some were programmed to disperse this kind of urban furniture, like benches and similar lighting for the lower level of plaza. So there were these kind of ingredients that were programming this plaza actually on a quite high resolution, because when you just seen the plaza, we didn't want to compete with the old city. It was just like a big landscape, a big white plain. But when you're in the plaza, you see the resolution at work and the experience of it. And at the same time, that project had a housing sequence, quite extensive one, which was brief, was requiring lots of housing on a very small compressed area. So we thought, how do we develop a kind of luxurious architectural fabric within these conditions, and again incorporate ingredients of local Mediterranean kind of inhabitation culture. So I thought about, because in Dalmatia people like to be outside, obviously the exterior space is a big deal. So we wanted to increase somehow, like in fractals, not just use the minimal point from A to B that would be just a line, but make something much more intricate and shredded that would develop micro patios and these kind of terraces. and develop this kind of vertical apartments that are all looking at the sea and the old city. So you're instead of sprawling lots of square feet this wasn't the kind of our strategy for developing a good quality living space, but this verticality, so you basically are glued to this view and you just live in it, and also in this kind of intricacy of exterior space. And we use the same algorithm or behavior for another competition in Montenegro, where we developed a small tower, a housing tower, 11 floors high. And again, this is just a snapshot from the custom written software. And in the software, you kind of embed always all the design intent, what you would like to happen. So again, the idea was similar of having this kind of balconies, and this was in Montenegro, so the kind of our working name for this project was Balkanies, which we really liked, but obviously the official name was Prisma. So these prismatic volumes that again, through agents, they're adapting to, I don't have a video again, I erased it, but basically agents are looking for the views, looking for the sun, and negotiating locally, somehow as if they're kind of amplifying local physics. So again, I won't go into details because I might be running over time. But and then another idea in this context of synthetic ecologies, which is the idea of not trying to replicate nature, or I don't know, because in lots of biomimetics you see this kind of idea of trying to replicate something. We don't want to design a new butterfly or a sunflower. They are already beautiful enough. But how we use some of these principles of information transfer, for instance, that I was mentioning before, like a local information transfer, in order to develop this kind of complexity. So in this case, we were looking at this Austrian factory, Fiber C, that is doing robotic cutting of glass fiber reinforced concrete for facades. And they have a very strict constraints, but also some freedoms, because embedded into this system. For instance, every panel of the facade could be different, because they drop a little chip in during the fabrication in each panel. So they can just, they all tag, they can just scan them on the construction site and assemble these facades. So we worked with some of these constraints, which one of them is, for instance, that if we want to develop a facade that is kind of complex, underlying structure has to stay horizontal. So the striation of these panels has to stay untouched. Let's say if this is a Y direction for this case, we cannot go with agents up and down. We can just stream in the depth and left and right. So these kind of constraints. So in this case, I won't go in depth with this project. This was a very large building, 350 meters long, again in Taiwan, in a kind of tropical climate, for a port terminal, very large international port terminal. But we developed something like a parallel realities or environments in this building by using these canyons, again, very deep, 33 meters deep on average canyons, and very long, where the air circulates a lot, and we treated them with different materials and different experiences. So there was always this kind of different elements in the building being carried through this materiality of these canyons. And also the kind of another element in the building that was quite dominant was the idea of navigation in the building, because usually when you're, let's say, at the airports or this type of port-like buildings, you have signages, so you follow the ship kind of comes and then you follow a certain paths following the signs. But I was thinking, in nature there is not that this kind of a switch on and off, but there is, for instance, a weather event like lightning. So how can you incorporate some idea of artificial lightning in the building, so then this structure that is very intricate and very redundant starts distributing lighting signaling. So so people start sort of following certain paths more intuitively. And I would just like to talk, probably I'm running out of time, but quickly Okay, great. So about one other topic, which is what I call somehow algorithmic profile of matter, and with Ben we talked about this quite a bit. And we spoke today quite a bit about data visualization. And although the data visualization exposes often this hidden beauty, intelligence, complexity of large data, for instance, but I'm sometimes talking about data materialization, and this is something that, because with students we work on usually on two types of projects. One is very large, which is the synthetic ecologies, but again, with incorporating very small, as I was showing, for instance, some of these sedimentation patterns in a river that becomes part of development. And then the other one is fabrication or I would say production methods that incorporates fabrication, manufacturing, constructibility. So looking into some systems and seeing whether we can mutate some modes of production. Because at the moment, architects, first of all, build very little percentage of everything that is built in the world. And second, they have very little saying in terms of modes of production. So with this kind of computational physics and large data, we can actually start accessing this. I don't think there is time to tell you this parallel story, which was development with my conversation with Reza Negarestani, but also some quotes. I highly recommend his book, Cyclonopedia, his concept of dustism. And already before I was mentioning this kind of idea of discreteness or going into more and more discrete units of logic or data that gives you larger resilience then to develop things at a higher or emerge things at a higher level. And I really love this concept of dustism that he's talking about in the context of sociopolitics of Middle East and agency of oil, but also in this case, this dust or desert. But at this point, I will just show this project that we developed in collaboration with this company in Italy called D-Shape. They have the biggest 3D printer on Earth, I guess, 6 by 6 by 6 meters large. And this printer is printing marble dust with magnesium dye. So because there is a lack of funding and it's a big mess, actually, I went to the factory and it was very dusty, but also amazing, the enthusiasm that Enrico Dini is putting into this and trying to develop this process. But I was saying, what if instead of just giving them something that is just a model geometry that then they just print, which they said that's what all the other architects did so far, I said, what if we try to develop a brain of this machine in a way? So take the constraints again and develop or design environment that can work with this machine. And I call this pavilion Negares Turing pavilion as a homage to Reza Negarestani and his porosity in Cyclonopedia, and at the same time Alan Turing, because towards the end of his life, Alan Turing was looking into some models in biology and kind of complex formations, and he was looking into this kind of symmetry breaking, local symmetry breaking, in order to develop some of these polymorphic complex patterns, and he developed this what is now called reaction diffusion algorithm. And what was interesting to me about this algorithm in relationship to this machine is because the machine deposits material in layers, and the algorithm at the same time, while it evolves over time, it has a capacity to flow matter, if we imagine it kind of flowing matter from one state to another. And time, I didn't have time to elaborate on that, but it's my biggest secret weapon and a kind of best ingredient in a way, because when you program certain processes, and this is in general, I think, a sort of characteristic of material processes, to evolve faster or slower, you get different material formations. So in this case, we were just evolving these Turing patterns slower or faster over time with some simple fitness condition, in this case, to develop a pavilion. But also we wanted to lighten, because when you print with this printer, it's a very heavy structure. It's heavy as stone, if not sometimes heavier, because of really the density of this material. So we wanted to distribute, instead of developing chunky big columns, we wanted to make a forest of very intricate porous columns. So this was a simple exercise, but as a result, we developed this software that now we can basically design many different aspects that take into consideration the noise of the machine and the dirtiness of the material process. Again, remember, again, the kind of Shannon's noise and all of that. So we developed this, but then I would say our students by far outperformed us in this game, because they then developed this amazing project where they looked into certain areas of the world where, I mean, there are no expensive 3D printers and all the technology that lots of architects are actually engaging right now, but people still, a big part of world population is still building with mud, quite honestly. So they looked into this idea of, and at the same time, for instance, in this case, in Morocco, one of these cultures that is using it, it's also a big social event, because people come together and they kind of have these almost rituals of working with these structures. So they looked into found physics, what Stuart Kaufman would say, I don't know, like order for free, because if you look at the cracking of the mud, in some parts of the world, this is really substantial in scale. So their concept was to, instead of printing complex 3D structures, let's harness this natural process and use it as a formwork for a kind of spanning structures that is extremely intricate and complex in a way, but you get this formwork for free. You don't have to use expensive milling and So the approach here was to use large data and simulation to first of all do this material test. So it was funny that at the AA, at the top floor, they were doing this kind of cracking of mud for 2-3 months, really rigorously, under different conditions, different type of mud, different types of temperatures, different speeds of heating, in a very primitive conditions of an architectural design studio, but still they try to develop this process and then incorporate this data into generative simulations. They also had some ideas of maybe doubling these layers that were casted to kind of increase resistance. And then they developed this quite high resolution simulations of cracking of this material. I'll try to run a bit faster here. And catalog of behavior. So of course you cannot really simulate exactly, if you're doing this kind of structure, you will never really compute exactly what will happen. But again, remember contingency a little bit from the beginning of the talk. But you will, because if you're using different types of, I'm wrapping up in 1 minute too. If you're using different type of mud or temperatures or in different locations, you do get different, for instance, scales and formation, different kind of behavior of these patterns. So they managed to sample that and then speculate about possible structures where, and this is one of the models, maybe 2 meters long, that they actually produced just in a studio environment by actually casting within mud cracking patterns in layers. It was extremely strong, actually. And again, this is not some sort of expensive industrial development. And then they looked into different parts of the world where this can occur. And in Morocco, they found also this interesting water harvesting in vernacular architecture, where you use this kind of porous structures to harvest night humidities in a desert. So then they try to simulate that through their structure. So they run the computational physics simulations and network this model in a way that even when you're searching for different shell conditions of these structures, they are fed by this kind of information of a local winds and local degree of humidity that then kind of force and shape this sort of shell. So shell is not just modeled as a shape, but it actually has this embedded into it. And then they started on top of that designing a little bit, playing with this ecology, design ecology that they set up. And these were some of the results. So again, I think, and also then they developed the whole micro-urban condition of developing a village of these structures. So again, here they used very high-end computational and information infrastructure, but very low-end, obviously, material and production structures. And I just wanted to sample, I could show much more obviously, but I just wanted to sample some examples that are coming from very different universes, but somehow arguing for this, that this convergence of matter and information or different systems now allows us for increased designability of the systems that we are working on. So I should probably close at this. Thank you.